June 24th, 1944. Camp Hearn, Texas. The cattle car doors screeched open, and sunlight hit them like a physical blow. Elsa Richter squinted against the glare, her wrists raw beneath steel chains that had bound her to 3 other women for 21 days. The metal had worn grooves into her skin, red and weeping. She expected barbed wire, expected guard towers and German shepherds straining at leashes, expected America to be exactly what the propaganda had promised. Brutal, savage, a nation of monsters disguised as liberators. Then she saw the rancher. He wasn't holding a rifle. He was holding bolt cutters. And when he looked at those chains, his weathered face hardened with something she couldn't name. Not pity, not contempt, something else entirely. He spoke 5 words through the interpreter that made every woman freeze. You won't need these here. If you're captivated by hidden stories from World War II that reveal the humanity behind the headlines, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss another untold chapter of history. Drop a like if you believe these stories deserve to be remembered, and comment below with where you're watching from. Let's build a community of history lovers across the globe. The chains hit the concrete with a sound like thunder. Elsa stared at her wrists, at the sudden absence of weight, at the impossible freedom of moving her arms independently. Around her, 11 other German women stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. They had been trained as radio operators, signals specialists, communications technicians. They had been captured in France as the Allied advance swept eastward. They had been packed into ships, transported across an ocean, delivered to Texas still chained like criminals. And now a cowboy with sun-damaged skin and calloused hands had simply removed their chains and walked away. In that moment, staring at the red grooves on her wrists, Elsa realized everything she'd been taught about America might be a lie. The journey to this moment had been long and brutal. Elsa Richter had grown up in Berlin, the daughter of a postal clerk and a seamstress. She had never been political, never particularly passionate about National Socialism. But when the war machine needed operators, it took them. She had been trained at 22, assigned to a signals unit in Normandy, tasked with relaying coded messages between command posts. Then the Allies landed. The Wehrmacht collapsed faster than anyone had predicted. Her unit retreated, scattered, was captured piecemeal by advancing American forces. He transitioned from soldier to prisoner happened in less than 48 hours. One morning she was encrypting tactical orders. The next she was chained to strangers, loaded onto trucks, then ships, then trains. The chains were regulation, standard procedure for transporting enemy combatants. 4 women linked together, wrists bound, movement synchronized. Elsa had spent 3 weeks learning to sleep while chained to Hilda on her left and Rosa on her right, listening to their breathing, feeling their restlessness transmitted through steel links. America's POW system in 1944 was massive and largely invisible to the civilian population. Over 425,000 Axis prisoners were held on American soil, the vast majority of them German. The camps were scattered across the country, concentrated in rural areas where land was cheap and labor was desperately needed. Camp Hearn in central Texas housed nearly 4,000 prisoners, mostly Afrika Korps veterans, captured in North Africa and Sicily. The facility sprawled across flat, sun-scorched prairie, row after row of wooden barracks enclosed by wire fences that gleamed like silver threads in the relentless heat. The temperature in late June routinely exceeded 100 degrees Fahrenheit. The air was so thick with humidity that breathing felt like drowning. The women had been brought here for administrative convenience, a small contingent of female prisoners consolidated from various captures. They were anomalies in a system designed for men, and Jack Morrison, 59-year-old rancher, had just agreed to employ 12 of them. Morrison owned 5,000 acres of pasture land southwest of the camp. His ranch had operated successfully for 30 years, raising cattle, growing feed, maintaining the delicate balance between land and livestock that sustained rural Texas. But the war had gutted his workforce. Every able-bodied young man had been drafted or lured away by high-paying defense jobs. His remaining hands were teenagers too young for military service and old-timers too worn for heavy labor. He needed workers desperately. The POW labor program offered a solution. Prisoners could be contracted for agricultural work under Geneva Convention guidelines. They would be paid nominal wages deposited into camp accounts. They would be transported daily under guard. They would return each evening. It was legal, practical, and mutually beneficial. But when Morrison saw those chains, saw the raw skin beneath the metal, saw 12 exhausted women looking at him with eyes that expected cruelty, something in him rebelled. Chains dangerous around livestock, he told the camp commandant through Wilhelm Fischer, the German-American interpreter from Fredericksburg who spoke both languages with equal fluency. Could catch on equipment, could spook cattle, could cause injury. The commandant's face was bureaucratic stone. Security protocol requires restraints for enemy combatants. Morrison's jaw tightened. His voice dropped to a register that left no room for negotiation. Then they're too dangerous for my ranch, and I'll find other labor. There's farms 20 miles north that'll take them unchained. Your choice. The silence that followed was heavy as the Texas heat. The commandant calculated. The labor shortage was real. Morrison's ranch was productive, reliable, politically connected, and civilian contractors had leverage the military desperately needed. Remove the chains, he said finally. The guard approached with keys. The metallic click of locks opening echoed through the processing room. Elsa felt the mechanism release, felt the chain fall away from her wrist, felt the weight she'd carried for 3 weeks vanish, and heard Morrison say through Fisher, "Your people first, prisoners second. Remember that." The words hung in the air like something sacred. People first. Elsa had been a German, then a soldier, then a prisoner, then a number, but not a person, not in any way that mattered. Not until this weathered rancher with dirt under his fingernails looked at her chains and decided they were unnecessary. That night, lying in her bunk at Camp Hearn, alone for the first time in weeks, Elsa couldn't sleep. Freedom felt too strange. Her wrists ached where the chains had been, phantom weight pulling at her arms. But when she lifted her hand in the darkness, it moved freely, unencumbered, and she almost wept. Monday morning arrived hot and bright. The women climbed into a military truck at dawn, no chains, just 2 guards who looked bored rather than vigilant. The vehicle rumbled southwest through endless Texas landscape, flat horizon, scattered cattle like toys against the sky, barbed wire fences running to infinity. 12 miles later they arrived at Morrison Ranch. The main house was white clapboard with a wide porch. surrounded by ancient live oaks that provided the only shade for miles. Barns and corrals clustered nearby, painted red, the wood silvered by decades of sun. Windmills turned slowly in the morning breeze, pumping water from aquifers deep underground. The scale was overwhelming. 5,000 acres, more land than Elsa could conceptualize. Morrison met them in the yard. Beside him stood Tom Rawlings, his foreman, a lean man in his 50s who'd worked this ranch for 30 years. Through Fisher, Morrison explained the work. Vegetable garden maintenance, livestock feeding and watering, fence repair, the endless task of maintaining miles of wire against the constant pressure of cattle and weather. Elsa was assigned to livestock detail, along with 5 other women. They were given work gloves, leather-worn but functional, too large for women's hands but serviceable. Morrison demonstrated how to use a pitchfork to toss hay into feeding troughs, how to pump water into metal tanks, how to move around cattle without startling them into panic. Then they began. The work was brutal. Radio operation required mental focus but minimal physical exertion. This was different. Lifting hay bales, hauling water buckets, walking miles across open pasture checking fence lines. By mid-morning, Elsa's back screamed. By noon, her hands were blistered despite the gloves. But she wasn't chained. That awareness returned constantly, surprising her each time. Every movement reaching for hay, stretching to fill a water tank, walking freely across open ground, reminded her of impossible freedom. At noon, Sarah Morrison appeared. The rancher's wife was a practical woman in her 50s, kind in a no-nonsense way that matched the landscape. She brought lunch on wooden trays, sandwiches made with thick bread and actual meat, fresh fruit, a large pitcher of lemonade beaded with condensation. The women ate in the shade of a massive oak. The guards sat nearby but didn't hover. Mrs. Morrison served the food with small gestures that conveyed respect. She placed plates in hands rather than dropping them on the ground. She made sure everyone had enough. When the first pitcher emptied, she brought more without being asked. The lemonade was a revelation. Cold, sweet, tart, shocking after weeks of tepid water and bitter coffee. Elsa drank slowly, trying to memorize this taste, trying to understand how kindness could be made liquid. Rosa spoke quietly in German. "This is strange." "What is?" Hilda asked. "All of it. The work, the food, the way they treat us like people." "Maybe here we are," Elsa said softly. "Maybe the war is somewhere else. Maybe on this ranch we're just workers, and they're just people who need workers." The others were silent, considering whether nationality could be suspended, whether enemy status was contextual rather than absolute. If so, everything they'd been taught was more complicated than they'd believed. The afternoon brought different challenges. Tom Rawlings showed them how to repair fence damage by cattle, how to stretch wire tight, how to hammer staples into wooden posts without splitting the wood. Tom spoke little, but his instructions were clear. He didn't care that they were German. He cared whether they worked honestly and learned quickly. By those measures, he seemed satisfied. 3 weeks into the work, Morrison had a problem. A cow had died giving birth. The calf survived barely, all legs and huge dark eyes, too weak to stand. Without its mother, it would die within days, unless someone bottle-fed it every few hours. Morrison walked into the barn where Elsa was stacking hay. "Need help with an orphan calf," Fisher translated. Needs bottle feeding to survive. Volunteers? Elsa's hand went up before she'd consciously decided. Morrison nodded, gestured for her to follow. The calf lay in fresh straw, too weak to protest. Morrison showed her how to mix formula. Powdered milk, warm water, precise measurements. How to fill the oversized bottle. How to hold it at the correct angle. How to be patient while the calf learned to suck. They're stubborn at first, Morrison said through Fisher. But once they learn, they'll remember you. You'll be its mother now. Elsa knelt in the straw, the coarse stalks pressing through the thin fabric of her trousers and scratching faintly at her knees. The barn was quiet except for the low, questioning sounds of the calf and the distant creak of wooden beams settling in the afternoon heat. The calf smelled like hay and warmth, and something indefinably alive and earthy, breathing scent that felt foreign to her, yet rounding. It was the smell of life continuing without ideology, without orders, without uniforms. She touched the calf's neck gently, surprised by the heat beneath its hide, by the steady pulse she could feel under her fingertips. The animal flinched, uncertain, then stilled. Elsa lifted the bottle, heavy with warm milk, and guided it toward the calf's mouth. It resisted at first, confused by the unfamiliar rubber nipple that was not its mother. Its head bobbed away, hooves shifting anxiously in the straw. Elsa persisted. She murmured softly, instinctively, strings of German words flowing from her lips before she realized what language she was using. The words were nonsense, comforting sounds rather than sentences, but they carried tone and intention, calm, reassurance, patience. Then the calf latched on. It drank desperately, its jaw working, milk disappearing rapidly from the bottle. Its tail twitched with unmistakable satisfaction, thumping lightly against Elsa's arm. The urgency of its hunger faded into contentment, and something inside Elsa cracked open. Not broke, opened. She had never been particularly maternal. She had grown up in a world of duty and discipline, where care was structured and affection was restrained. She had trained herself to be useful, efficient, obedient, but this calf needed her. Its survival depended on her patience, her attention, her willingness to return every few hours with a bottle, even when she was tired, even when her hands ached. And the calf did not care that she was German. It did not know about borders or wars or uniforms. It only knew that she brought food and warmth and safety. When the bottle emptied, the calf lifted its head and looked at her. Its eyes were dark and glossy, reflecting the dim light of the barn, holding only gratitude, no judgment. No memory of what she represented to the world beyond these wooden walls. Morrison watched from the barn entrance. One shoulder leaned against the door frame, his hat pushed back slightly on his head. He said something quietly. "That calf won't forget you," Fisher translated. "You're its person now." Elsa swallowed, suddenly unable to speak. She fed the calf 4 times a day for 2 weeks. Morning, midday, late afternoon, and once more before nightfall. She learned its rhythms, its sounds, the way it nudged her leg impatiently when she was too slow, the way it leaned into her when it drank. She watched it grow stronger, watched its legs steady, watched it stand taller each day. Soon it ran clumsily around the corral, stopping abruptly, skidding in the dirt, then bounding forward again with awkward joy. Each feeding session felt like proof that her hands could sustain instead of destroy. that she could participate in creation instead of supporting systems designed for death. Then Morrison taught her to ride. It happened unexpectedly. One morning, cattle needed to be moved between pastures, and his regular hands were occupied repairing fencing after a storm. Morrison looked at Elsa, really looked at her the way she moved among the animals without fear, the confidence that had settled into her posture. "You ever ride a horse?" Fisher translated. "No," Elsa admitted honestly. "Want to learn?" She did. Desperately. Morrison started her on an old mare named Patience, a name earned through years of steady work and forgiving temperament. The horse stood calmly as Elsa approached, ears flicking back and forth, assessing her without concern. Morrison showed her how to mount, where to place her foot, how to swing her leg over without startling the animal. He taught her how to sit balanced in the saddle, how to hold the reins loosely instead of clenching them in fear, how to communicate not through force, but through subtle shifts of weight and intention. The first ride was terrifying and thrilling in equal measure. The height alone made her dizzy. The movement beneath her was alive, powerful, unpredictable. This was not machinery. This was a living creature that could choose cooperation or rebellion. But Patience was patient, and Elsa was determined. By the third lesson, she could walk the horse confidently. By the fifth, she could trot without panic, learning to rise and settle with the rhythm instead of fighting it. By the 10th, Morrison trusted her enough to help move small groups of cattle between pastures' real work, meaningful work that freed his experienced hands for harder tasks. The transformation was remarkable. Elsa Richter, radio operator from Berlin, was becoming a cowgirl in Texas. She learned the ranch's geography intimately. Every pasture, every water source, every gate and fence line. She learned which cattle were calm and which were difficult, which needed space and which followed easily. She learned to read weather in cloud formations and wind direction, to feel changes in pressure before storms arrived. She learned to judge time by the position of the sun instead of clocks. Her body changed. Muscles developed in her arms, shoulders, and legs. Her hands grew calloused and strong. Her skin darkened from constant sun exposure, freckles blooming where pale skin once hid from daylight. She became stronger than she had ever been, not just physically, but in ways that were harder to name. Tom Rawlings noticed. One afternoon, as they worked together repairing a windmill, passing tools back and forth in companionable silence, he spoke in his slow, thoughtful drawl. "You got a natural feel for this work," he said. "Most city folks never develop it." "Berlin is very different from here," Elsa replied in careful English. Tom nodded. "War's a strange thing. Takes people from where they belong and drops them somewhere unexpected. Sometimes they find they belong in the new place better than the old." Elsa had no answer, but that night, lying in her bunk, she thought about his words. She thought about the calf that recognized her voice and followed her along the fence line, the horse that responded to her commands, the fence she had repaired that would stand for years, holding boundaries meant to protect, not imprison. She thought about work that left her exhausted but satisfied, work that demanded effort but gave something tangible in return, work that asked for responsibility, not obedience. And for the first time in years, she slept without dreaming of static-filled transmissions or distant explosions, only open land, steady hands, and the quiet continuation of life.